Morning, everyone. I'm Jamira Alexander, the President and Executive Director of Public Narrative, and I am incredibly excited to share with you our very first art and culture event sponsored by the MacArthur Foundation, the Adler University, and the University of Chicago. I am extremely excited and just ultimately proud of the interns that we work with who have put together this incredible event. We gathered journalists and artists to talk more about social justice and racial equity and how to leverage art and journalism for the sake of changing those narratives. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Shelby Graves. Shelby?
Yeah, so we hosted a series of discussions with journalists and artists on 2 separate days, March 6th and March 13th. And we have some art and some words to share with you all from those discussions. So the first participant we had for our March 6th discussion is a graduate student at Columbia College, Chicago. She is also a reporter for Austin Talks and covers the Austin neighborhood in Chicago. She had this to say in response to the question, "What do you want to see change in the next 5 years?" She said, "For me and my industry in the next 5 years, I hope there is a more concerted effort to plug local newspapers and local media, but also within the mainstream. I hope that there is a destigmatization when covering Black and Brown communities, because I've noticed that when we focus solely on neighborhoods that experience higher levels of violence or disinvestment, that it can also perpetuate negative stereotypes or falsehoods about the people of the community." Without further ado, here is a video submission from Shelby Hawkins.
So the other day I got the question, is journalism an art? And it definitely feels like it, although we, journalists, are often pushed into a category of our own, separate from artists and creatives. There's writers, then there's reporters, there are journalists, and there are photojournalists. A distinction, even if a small one. And sure, journalists may take creative liberties with their work, but for the most part, it's pretty formulaic. To write a news story, you first need a lead, then that graph, somebody with more specific information, and there really doesn't need to be an ending in the traditional sense, because news stories are constantly evolving as new information enters the public sphere. So describing my creative process is a little difficult for me, because you don't want to be too creative with facts, or else it will turn into fabrication. Something that I've been considering since the last dialogue we had is, how can I best represent the communities I report on without claiming ownership over them? And I believe there's this narrative internalized in artists and creatives that when you create something, you own it. It's yours. It belongs to me. When in reality, art is meant to be shared. It's supposed to be appreciated, not appropriated. I believe this stems from another internalized mindset that derives from colonization. We assume, because of our history, that culture can be conquered and stolen, taken from us. That's never been the case. Our stories can't be erased because they're inside of us. They're not finished stories either. They're constantly evolving and continue to get even more beautiful. I'm in a field where I'm fortunate enough to get to connect with people who are willing to share their stories and experience with me, so that I can give them the platform they deserve, even if at this point in my career, my platform is relatively small. But still, it's a powerful thing, and I'm grateful.
Awesome. Thank you, Shelby. Our next participant is an artist, printer, and the owner and founder of Flatlands Press. In our discussion, he powerfully said, "I believe that we create the world we want to live in. So every day I'm working toward that." He also says, "I feel like I'm working for my ancestors and for my great-grandchildren. And here to talk about his work and process today live is Manny.
Hello. Yeah, I wrote a little something because I can kind of rant. All right, I decided to focus on aspirational and joy and fantasy and liberation for Black and Brown communities for the work I created. The series I worked on are a series of screen prints that I'm titling The Future Days Mask. They're a meditation on my ancestors and the dreams of a future full of knowledge and joy. The images are anchored in Afrofuturism. Conceptually, I embraced the sounds of other Afrofuturists like Sun Ra, Alice Coltrane, and the recently released album titled Brass by Moore Mother and Billy Woods. Additionally, I leaned into old concepts like the stories of creation by the Dogon, a tribe in Mali, and their belief in visitors from the stars. I'm also reminded of the masks that adorn my grandparents and my mother's houses, which have been collected from around the world. When I imagine liberation, I see freedom to explore, to break with perceived boxes, to simply unlearn, and perhaps most importantly, to offer a sense of joy and something otherworldly with a strong cultural influence as its foundation. This project has allowed me to challenge myself aesthetically, which has been liberating. The colors used in the celestial cosmic mask are colors in the Zulu tribe and are often referred to as power colors in the print world. And design sensibility, I have a strong affinity for the Bauhaus. On the surface, metallic hues are enveloped by Mars black ink. I wanted to pay homage to the energy and explosion of color I found engrossing in the work of Afro Cobra. Using emblematic silhouettes as a foundation allows me to use color to create depth and allude to possibilities. Chicago has a long history of Black printmakers, Elizabeth Catlett, Charles White, just to name a few. The prints for this series are also inspired by the Southside Community Arts Center and my work in the Printers Guild as one of a few members who identify as Black. It's been an honor to bring attention to BIPOC artists, and in this case, the historic nature of the Southside Community Arts Center through these prints. The screen prints are all 18 by 24 on archival rag paper. One of each edition will be donated to the Chicago Printers Guild archive. As a printer, I often work in solitary conditions. For this series, I had the opportunity to spend my Sundays working on the proofs in a friend's studio. After a year of deep quarantine, this too has given me joy and provided new art-making experiences. Last Sunday, while the prints dried, we enjoyed a long spring afternoon on the rooftop, talking about future collaboration and watching the falcons that live in the nearby clock tower. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manny. Our next participant is a Chicago journalist. She has a communications business where she acts as a publicist and a communications consultant. She also mentions that her heart is very much in local journalism and community journalism. One really amazing thing that we thought she said was, "I still have to define my art. I'm just not willing anymore. I just don't give a damn who doesn't accept it anymore." And that's the thing, right? Black artists have created their own table, and it should make the world be scared shitless. Here is a video submission from V.L. Harrison.
Hello, everyone. My name is V.L. Harrison. I am a local Chicago journalist. I am very honored to have been considered for this project with Public Narrative, especially since I am Colum alum. So go Columbia College and go Public Narrative. What I'll be sharing with you today is my creative process as a journalist, one of my most recent pieces, and some exciting news. So as of about last month, I am now a contributing writer for Pigment Magazine. Yay! Pigment Magazine, so excited to kind of break away from community journalism just a bit and talk a little more internationally about the arts and culture of Black folks. So one of the current pieces that I'm working my way through is a piece on South African art during the pandemic. They have a gallery in Cape Town, South Africa called Next Gallery. And so Next Gallery is very Black focused, African history focused art gallery. And they'll be doing this online exhibition that's really a big idea. And it's really a big deal there in South Africa. So I spoke with art curator Blake Anthony about some exhibitions, and we recently featured one of the artists in Pigment magazine. But for me, this piece was very personal. And that's because opposite of the pieces that I normally write on in community journalism about the neighborhoods I grew up in on the west side of Chicago, Pigment allows me to write internationally as a Black journalist. And I am just so incredibly honored by that, because there's so many more stories to tell than the gun violence in Chicago and the incredibly crooked politics in the city in which I grew up in, and the terrible inequitable education that I've witnessed and been a part of my entire life. There's so much more beauty in being Black. And in writing with race in mind, I'm really excited to be a part of this public narrative project because it really talks about the equity in my art. All right, how loud I am allowed to be as a Black journalist. And I've been writing for great publications, including Ebony Magazine, thetribe.com, and now writing for Pigment. I'm incredibly excited because I get to take that voice internationally. So this very first piece that I worked on that I'm super excited to share is basically on an international art gallery in South Africa. I learned a lot about myself, realizing that my history as an African, a descendant of Africans, really says a lot about the art that I love and the culture that I live. So this piece taught me a lot about who I am. It gave me great ideas about where I'd like to go. It taught me about the history of art in Africa. Being a contributing writer to Pigment magazine taught me a lot about myself as a Black journalist. Because as a Black journalist writing in inner city Chicago, I am just so always inundated with the bad news of this person got shot in Bucktown, this person got killed in Austin, and there's so much more to our history. So it taught me that our history is richer than violence. Our history is richer than being statistics. And I am so honored. So just writing for Pigment magazine, getting this article together, talking to gentlemen named Blake Anthony from South Africa, was just all this combined, humbled experience. And it allowed my Blackness to shine through. And for that, I really appreciate the opportunity with Pigment and this opportunity with Public Narrative. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, V. Our next participant is a designer, muralist, rapper, and radio host. He had this to say about some of the themes in his art. It's so much more to Black history than the simple things covered in school. And there's so much Black history, specifically in Chicago, that gets overlooked. So often in my work, I'm focusing on those things and celebrating those different moments that may inspire someone else. Here's a video submission from Pugs Adams.
Pugs Adams. My name is Pugs Adams, and right now I'm working on a video presentation. So, I've pretty much laid out the imagery and recorded some stuff and all that. So now it's just kind of like placing it and, picking some cool transitions to go in it. But, ultimately in the conversation, I just, I heard some hurt, and that I could relate to. I heard, some need for change that's obvious. And also, I just got a chance just to hear from other people going through the same things, and as artists, I think that's helpful to know you're not the only one or, isolated in the incidents. But, it's definitely need change and, making things more available to the artists, that might not be in the network, or, might not have that same schooling to get them in the door. I think that's really the thing. Just, more outlets in, you know, more diverse communities to help artists really, you know, to make it, to achieve their goals, to help, you know, writers, photographers, videographers, etc., to be able to succeed. You know, not so much red tape, you know.
Thank you, Pugs, for your words and your art. Our next artist is a shea butter entrepreneur, DJ, and disciplinary artist. She said this about the change that she wants to see. I want to see these organizations change. I want to see leadership change. Often it falls on the backs of Black people, people of color, women, queer people, trans people, non-binary people to change this world, to change white supremacy. Here is a video submission from Itunu, also known as Petty Mogul.
Hello, my name is Itunu Ebikinyi, also known as Petty Mogul. I also DJ under the alias The Wife of Wrath. I participated in the Public Narrative group in March 6, 2021. On my experiences and my experience and my art piece, I will honestly say I didn't really have a positive experience of the group discussion. I did like meeting my fellow artists, working in my community, my fellow makers and creators in my community, but it wasn't really about that. We got, you know, a brief moment to introduce ourselves and introduce our artwork, but we didn't really go into in-depth discussion about our own art making, our own process, what inspires us. Instead, I feel like we were mined for potentially traumatic experiences with racism. Toni Morrison said racism serves as a distraction. And when the first question that was really asked to us is about racism, I really felt that quote in that moment. I felt like, okay, these people ain't gonna be asking the right questions. The right questions are not going to be asked. I feel like me as an artist, I'm inspired by Black joy. And I found it really difficult to make a piece inspired by that conversation because I try not to center whiteness. I've done that. I've been there before. I've poured out my emotions, my traumas out for whiteness, and I question why. I question the need to change, to work so hard to change white people, and to affect their opinions or their thoughts or white institutions or anything. So I think my piece kind of reflects that apathy towards them. I'm really tired of institutions paying us to probe us for our traumatic experiences. I hope moving forward, we're going to ask ourselves different questions, to be introspective about the ways we be introspective, to think about how we think, to flip everything on its head, to question everything, and to really ask ourselves different questions. Are we doing the work of white supremacy, whiteness, distracting ourselves, even in our spaces, even in our most creative and imaginative spaces? Yeah. Again, I really like talking to my fellow artists, my fellow cohorts about their work. I wish there was more of that. Wish there was more artist-like discussion. And I hope future iterations of this focus on that aspect.
Thank you, Itunu, for your honesty and for your suggestions and just of how we can ask better questions. I'm always learning and taking in new perspectives, so I really appreciate your contributions and your suggestions of how we can do better. So thank you to everyone from our March 6th discussion. Really loved seeing your art and hearing your words and your stories, because they are so important and so powerful. So with that, I am going to pass it over to my fellow intern, Meg, who is going to introduce the artists and journalists from the March 13th discussion.
Good morning, everyone. As Shelby so nicely introduced me, I'm another intern, and I have the pleasure of introducing some of our artists and journalists from the March 13th session. So our first participant is Josh McGee. He is a journalist and a reporter at Injustice Watch. A powerful response he gave when speaking on an experience that was impacted by racism was, "That was always the thing that kind of stuck out, because I could look on the comments or stories and I could see where people would be interested in wanting to know more about this. But when I would talk to them in their neighborhood, they didn't have that same energy. They wouldn't give me the same space." And so now I'm going to turn it over to Josh, who is joining us here today.
Hey, I want to thank Public Narrative for this opportunity. During our discussion, we talked just about some of how racism has played into our work and how it's affected our careers. And I wrote this in reflection. Was it my hair or was it my clothes? Did I need to look more official? Should I wear my ID badge around my neck? Should I tie my locks back into a pony? Or should I just cut my hair altogether? I eventually did when I fit the description. I was reminded of these moments and how they shaped my career earlier this month at an art and culture discussion hosted by Public Narrative. During the discussion, journalists and artists shared how racism and bias had affected our work. As everyone slowly opened up, my brain shuffled through dozens of scenarios that all seemed to resolve around how I appeared to others. As a neighborhood journalist, I would often wander blocks in the hopes of catching a chatty neighbor walking their dog to comment on the news of the day. Sometimes it was a neighborhood development. Often it was a crime, a warning of robberies or a shooting in the area. Sometimes I was on the north side. Other times I was on the south or the west side. Often my results depended on which side of the city I was on. I distinctly remember the responses from white neighbors on the north side. I'd ask a question and they'd ask more questions. Are you from here? Where do you work? Let me see your ID. The ID thing always stuck with me. They never asked me for ID on the south side or the west side. There, I was more likely to be buzzed into an apartment building or invited into a home. Grandmothers told me what they saw from behind their screen doors, and I sat with families in their front rooms. There was that one time on the west side, though. I was asking neighbors if they heard about a criminal who'd attacked multiple people in the area recently. Found a woman who had seen a sketch of the alleged attacker. Had I, she asked? I hadn't. I pulled it up on my phone. He had shoulder-length locks, just like mine. The rest of the sketch was vague, but I quickly got the message. We look alike, I asked. I entered a Brownsville barbershop around closing time that night and cut off all my hair. After that day, I began to question how outlets reported on police reports. Were the descriptions descriptive? Heights ranging from 5'8" to 6'3", weighing 180 to 220 pounds. I moved away from those stories and began to work towards different reporting. It got me in trouble, but good trouble. Since those years, I've grown, my work has grown, and so has my hair.
Thank you so much, Josh. Our next participant from the March 13th session is Danielle Scruggs. Danielle is a journalist and an artist who integrates photography into her practice. Danielle has experience with documentary photography, the artistic editing side of photography, and working with news outlets. And a powerful statement she had in response to the question, how do we initiate change? How do we call attention to these microaggressions in this systematic racism? And she responded, really thinking about the concept of safety and what we can do to make sure that everyone within all of our various communities feels safe enough to be able to do whatever it is that they want to do to change. The systems that feel safe enough to be able to do whatever it is that they want to do. The systems that we need to change, I feel safe enough to experiment. I feel safe enough to fail, like safe enough to feel enough to start building something else that can make sure that things are better for future generations. And now you can see Danielle's video submission.
Hi, my name is Danielle Scruggs. I am a photographer and photo editor based here in Chicago. I consider myself both an artist and a journalist. I have a separate artistic practice, and I've worked as a photo editor for a variety of news publications since 2010. And currently I work at Getty Images. Previously I worked at Fox Media, The Undefeated, Chicago Reader. I've also freelanced for the New York Times and for The Tribe. And in the March 13th conversation, the arts and culture conversation with Public Narrative, I think the theme that really kind of struck me the most, and I think the theme that kept reoccurring the most was this idea of instead of investing so much in the way things are right now, you know, what can we do to build better systems and like ultimately build a better world, and not be so invested in like things as they are, but like how can we challenge ourselves to imagine things like as they actually could be. So so that was something that really stood out to me, and that was something that has really stuck with me. And like I've been thinking a lot about how I can bring that into my own work as both an artist and a journalist. And so I decided to create a visual arts piece kind of in conversation with that conversation, or kind of like reflecting my ideas that came about from that. And so I'm currently working on a digital collage. It's not quite done, but I decided to create a digital collage that kind of shows like what I think the world could look like, and specifically what Chicago can look like if we put in better systems and if we start imagining a better world. And for me, that means, you know, living and working in an environment where Black people feel safe and whole and happy and free. So I went through different archives and also my own personal archive as well of photos, and just kind of was thinking about images of Black joy, Black freedom, Black happiness, like Black people at play and leisure, like and then also just kind of like architectural markers that, you know, really speak to Chicago. And I really just wanted to make a work of art that reflected this idea of just imagining a better world. And yeah, like not being so invested in how things are, but like really concentrating on how things could be for now and for the future going forward. So so that's where this collage image came about. And yeah, I just feel really grateful that I was able to be a part. Hi, my name is Danielle Scruggs. I am a photographer and photo editor based here in Chicago.
All right, thank you, Danielle, for that description of your process and the beautiful collage. And so next, I'll be introducing Allie Elmore. Allie is a photographer who blends the roles of artist and journalist with photojournalism and documentarian style work. Allie spoke on her experience in this space when speaking upon an experience of racism that she had in her field. And she very powerfully stated, "Photography is white man dominated, like point blank, period. Photography equipment can be expensive, so it is not accessible to a lot of communities." And Allie is here with us today, and so we are going to get to hear from her now.
Well, hi, my name is Allie Elmore. First of all, thank you for having me here. It was an interesting conversation for sure. And I was excited to be in the space with such wonderful image makers and people with incredible voices and stories to tell. So most of my work these days is portraiture, but it felt weird in a way to be including portraits of people, like real life people that I know for this conversation. So I took a turn and went to my original love of photography, which was cityscapes. I am from Chicago, born and raised. I remember just experiencing racism at the earliest age, growing up in Pilsen, a very Latinx neighborhood at the time, and traveling to the West Side to visit family there, and just being in a lot of communities of color. I went to high school downtown, so it was right away that I was experiencing racism. So I spent a lot of time outside after school. So I went back to that because that was like the first foundations, and ever since then, it's just been present. So I took the landscape and things. I took the landscape and I thought, what if I, in a way, erase these white faces off of the building? So I manipulated the imagery, added some space in there quite literally. The thing I enjoy about space is you can look at the stars infinitely. And I once was really invested and read that to a telescope, the more zoomed in you look at a point, you see more stars in the clusters. So I really took that to heart. Like, this is exponentially, if we focus on the space that's there, you'll find more clusters of stars, of more people that you could highlight instead of the same white faces. And I imagined, what if we had empowering words in the places where things happen, like downtown, and had big murals there that highlighted communities of color instead. But I could not see that possible in the real world that we have today. So I made it a little more futuristic, otherworldly, fantastical, because that's a lot of elements that I explore in my portrait work of people. So thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing that. All right, and then on to our next participant. I'll be introducing Ariane Nettles. Ariane is a freelance journalist and a professor at Northwestern. And something she had said during the March 13th session that resonated with some of the interns and participants was in response to when she had said a time in which she experienced racism, and she had the following quote: "Well, if you cannot be human and find empathy in the situation of others, like if you feel like as a white man, you won't be stopped by the police, you won't have the same situations. If you cannot find empathy, then I have no interest in making this story for you." And we are fortunate to have Ariane joining us live today, so I'm going to turn it over to her.
Thank you. In our session, as a journalist and not, I guess I haven't traditionally called myself an artist, but I was very inspired by the discussions of the artists in our group. And we talked a lot about owning and creating pathways for whether it is as specific as distribution of art and work, but also, making those kind of pathways for ourselves, for our communities, for younger people in our field who are working and trying to make their way. And so we had some gallery owners on our call, multiple. And so, it made me think about historically, especially in Chicago, how we have such a strong history of Black-owned media companies and organizations. So I started looking through the Chicago Public Library digital collections, which is kind of my favorite thing to do, honestly. And I found this image of Marion Campfield, and she was the city editor for what was called the Chicago Bee. So one of the many, many images, she actually in this true photo that I found. She was standing in front of the Chicago Defender offices, and it was around 1948. And, you can see in her car, she has the press car sign, and she was known for like getting in her car and going around and finding the stories, and so one thing that kept coming up in our discussion was, journalists and artists, how we are telling these stories for our communities and how we really can't rely on other people, or maybe even just like traditional legacy organizations, right? We can still, of course, hold those legacy organizations accountable for being more representative of our city. But at the end of the day, there's so much opportunity for us to create our own projects and organizations and really kind of spearhead what we want to see. And I found this kind of draft copy of what was going to be like a chapter in an analysis about the Black press in Chicago. And, the title really kind of stood out to me, like Bronzeville finds its voice. And you see like an editor wrote like in pencil on top, like a community finds its voice. And I think that kind of helps us when we are talking about our path forward. Even in the actual text, they talk about like, the former families and former enslaved people, how, when we came to Chicago and all this, how we were able to kind of create something really beautiful. And I see that, we have the tribe that was a part of this. I'm just using them as an example because they're a Black-owned media company here in Chicago, and they're really amazing. And so we can see a lot of this work already happening. And I kind of use the backdrop of flowers because they're so beautiful and they're in bloom. And when we kind of put this focus on what we want to create and what we want to look like, I think that something beautiful can really bloom from that. So I know that we have a lot of hurt and a lot of pain happening, and that was some of the stuff that we talked about, but I think that there's so much opportunity to bloom. And so that was my inspiration. So I was really inspired by the artists on our conversation, because I am not even primarily a visual journalist even. So I wanted to kind of do something fun and different. And I had a really good time doing something different besides maybe my normal go-to would have been like writing a piece. So this was really great for me.
Thank you so much for sharing that rich history and imagery with us. Our next participant from the March 13th session is Jared Brown. Jared is an interdisciplinary artist creating a variety of work, including written, visual, and performance art. A quote in which struck the public narrative interns was when they responded to the question, "So given our conversation, what do you hope will be different either in your artistic community or within the journalism community?" They responded, I want us to have newer ways not to just consume work, but to really show artists while they're alive that their work matters." And now we're going to play their video submission.
Hi, this is Jared Brown coming at you live. Well, I don't know if it's going to be live by the time you see it, but now I'm for a job. I'm kind of still processing that right now. So the deliverable piece that I am going to share is going to be something written. So I don't fully know what I can show you, except for this is the space where it's happening. It's a nice like, sunlit studio. There's some plants and speakers. We're doing a lot of sound stuff, which I guess on some level will inform this written piece. But I tend to always kind of have a journal by me. And this was made by another artist in Chicago named Katie Chung. Shout out to her. And I'm usually have some books around. So right now it's this book that I think is going to inspire a lot of the writing for what I'm going to do for public narratives. It's called Waking the Tiger, Healing Trauma by Peter A. Levine. And I've also been reading Jazz by Toni Morrison. Definitely probably one of the sexier songs from Tony. But I think after this conversation that we all had, I was just super inspired by artists and writers like sharing space and coming together. And I think the writing piece where I'm at with it, it's gonna be not really formal, it's gonna be prose, poetic. I like to think, but but I think it's gonna be really, really inspired by notions of safety. How do we make people feel safe to experiment? How do we make people feel safe to fail? And like I was saying, I'm just super inspired to have shared space with so many writers, and it made me think that maybe our roles as artists can shift, where we can kind of tap more into building language around what we're doing and not really rely on language that already exists. And I don't know, maybe writers could stand to, or not so much writers can do this themselves, but maybe other people can give writers more space to like be creative in their field and more artistic in their field, and kind of deviate from maybe some of the like older formats that we've had to comply with. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm definitely inspired by artists and writers coming together. I've been feeling failed by language, so I think this piece is going to directly address that. And who else to build new verbiage, new language within writers. Like, I'm so ready for this like new era of like collaboration. And so I think public narratives for just that inspiration. And I'm sorry I won't be able to be there in live in real time, but I hope the piece resonates, and shout out to everybody that I got to share space with. Thank you, Public Narratives. Peace.
All right, thank you to Jared for that inside look at their creative process. Our next participant is Yvonne Cruz. Yvonne has taken on many roles, including educator, artist, and business owner. They had a salient response to the question, what do you hope will be different either in your artistic community or within the journalism community? When 5 years from now, what do you think should be different? And she responded, I would love to see change, but from the inside out. I hate how there's so many communities which have been changed by gentrification and capitalism. And so what I would love to see is for those communities to become cultural hubs, but not to forget the people who are the reason why they are now cultural hubs. And they are live with us today, so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to her now.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Yvonne, and thank you again for Public Narrative for having this opportunity to have this dialogue. I think that we need more of it. So I wanted to share my piece that I created. Thank you. So I am, in general, I'm a multimedia artist. So I do photography, painting, drawing, curator, and I'm, an educator. And a lot of my work is reflection on society, reflection of myself. And so as I get older, I tend to create work that is positive. So I think that I'm always asking myself, we need to be the change that we envision. And so this piece is a response to some of the words and some of the dialogues that are heard, and just to kind of bring back some of those words that, I kind of circled and was kind of building on this drawing, was like stories and change, engagement, diversity, community, value, connect, inside out, which is what, I was speaking to, and freedom. And so I created this piece thinking that, how amazing can it be if we all have this responsibility to take change into our own hands and be personally responsible for our own bit. And water's always been a symbol of purity, and it's often seen as a source of life, literally giving life, emerging from. And, in some Taoist traditions, water is also considered an aspect of wisdom. And the concept here is that water can take on any form. So wisdom, that it could be in the form that it is held in, but it can move paths and of least resistance. So for me, you know, there is no life without water, and it's within our hands. And so this is, you know, it's kind of working on a few different levels. And I also believe that, you know, I think what the pandemic has given an opportunity to really realize what was already in our faces, but then an opportunity to learn from it and to renew from it, especially thinking about those underinvested, ignored communities, and so that have been devastated by the pandemic. And then also, I was thinking about just like how the pandemic has forced us to like go through the physical act of washing our hands all the time, and how symbolic that is of just being clean. And so, yeah, I created this piece as a result of that.
Thank you much. Thank you so much for sharing that gorgeous piece. We're going to go ahead and head to the next person from the March 13th session, which is Claire Voon. Claire is a freelance journalist who has previously worked in newsrooms for 5 years. And when speaking on her experience on what she would like to see changed, Claire stated, "The greater problem it creates is really this limitation of time and space, where the pressure of pace really controls how we write. The question is sort of, how do you honor someone's story when we are under the pressure of deadlines and editors? You really have to change the model of journalism and find people who want to invest in the funding." So now Claire is going to speak about her experience, and I will go ahead and hand it off to her.
Hey, thanks again for having me. So something that stuck with me during our session was Andrea Giles of the eponymous gallery said, "Art is given the least piece of the pie." And, you know, I really it made me think about how journalism lives in this economy of scarcity. And I wanted to think about more, think more about, you know, who is sort of giving that pie. And, you know, that lack of attention, I know, does not stem from a dearth of culture writers, but, you know, from a scarcity of publications and editors who writers can feel like we can really trust. And that trust, you know, can come in many forms, from knowing that our words will still feel like our words at the end, to knowing that we will receive fair treatment for our labor. And, you know, one way to counter that scarcity is to create new publications and new models and new spaces that can be more equitable and more imaginative. But I also think that it is upsetting that we have to make the decision oftentimes to leave existing spaces at all, when others with the power to really better those spaces have not done the work to begin with. And so, informed by my experiences and other journalists that I've talked to, I wanted to share what I would like to see newsrooms, particularly white-led newsrooms, do to create better journalism in regards to art and culture. And I don't know if you have the 5 bullet points that I had sent, or I can just read them.
If you could read them, that would be fantastic.
So yeah, firstly, I would like newsrooms to dedicate space and time to ongoing and consistent art coverage. I feel like many publications now have just slashed their coverage and oftentimes just do a big blowout art issue, which is great, but, you know, are you creating space for art in other areas? You know, having this consistent coverage not only lets the readers know that you are committed to the arts, but also helps to establish trust within the creative community, you know, people that you as journalists will be reaching out to as sources. Secondly, I want newsrooms to hire journalists for for their different perspectives and actually uphold their voices. In particular, hire journalists of color, but not because you want to check off your diversity list. I want publications to take a chance on that writer who is really embedded in their community or has that innate knowledge, even if they may not have what the hiring person needs to see on a resume, and to really then, support and trust that writer and really honor their voice and mentor them so that they can eventually be promoted to an editor position. Thirdly, to know that established editorial standards and language traditions can fail sometimes. Style guides are really necessary in our industry, but biases are baked into them. And rules can always be updated to better meet the moment. And so, let's talk about why we prioritize anglicized versions of words in other languages. Let's talk about removing the hyphen from identities like Asian American. Let's talk about capitalizing the B in Black. Number 4, don't make assumptions of your audience. Too often, do newsrooms seem to cater to this imagined white, heterosexual, cisgender readership, and this affects the issues that editors believe readers are interested in, which results in insufficient content, less interesting stories, and just fails to resonate with the entirety of your community. And don't underestimate their knowledge either. When it comes to writing about art, I firmly believe that it's important to write clearly and to untangle art speak, but it's also equally important to honor an artist's voice and perspective, particularly when they've honored you with their time and knowledge. And lastly, I want newsrooms to pay journalists and writers a living wage. Art coverage takes critical thinking. It can be a very personal kind of writing. And so properly compensate writers for their labor and give them fair contracts. And doing so, if you do that, writers will keep bringing ideas to your newsrooms that only they can bring and always want to deliver their best work. Compensation for art writing is so low that as a freelancer, I can't prioritize it. And this goes for freelancing, but also staff positions. Many of these positions, earn around $35,000 or $45,000, which this is a barrier to people who are not wealthy enough to work for that little, and it perpetuates inequality. And I acknowledge that these hopes are still operating as part of a capitalist society and commercialized journalism, and that the best strategy for change would really be building alternatives to capitalism, which is, I think, something that keeps emerging in all these sessions. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Claire, for your input and your emphasis on intentionality. That was really great. Our next participant is Matt Harvey. He is a journalist. He has written for the Chicago Reader. And Matt was unfortunately unable to join us today, but we wanted to honor his opinions and share the following quote. And he shared his experience in reflection of experiencing racism in the journalism community. And he stated, it goes back to a lot of conformity. They have a lot of It goes back to a lot of comfort they have because they know that we need them. We need these publications as journalists to get paid if we want our careers to be sustainable over time. And it gives them so much ability to do shit just like that, just like erasing freelancers' voices from their stories. And Matt had some really powerful impact. We're missing him today, but we thank him for his participation. And our next participant is Andrea Giles. He is an artist and co-owner of Gallery Giles. Andre shared his powerful outlook on racism by saying, I believe racism is only as strong as we make it, meaning as long as we stay in our own communities and we don't go anywhere else and people don't come here, then it lives. But once they meet you and see our creative work and see who we are as people and understand that we're so much more similar and better than we are together, That is how we fight it. And so now we're going to watch a video submission.
Hello, my name is Andrea Giles, artist, 27 years, born and raised in Chicago, collector, curator, and co-owner of Gallery Giles. I was very excited to have participated in the recent panel, particularly because it's an issue that needs more conversation and more dialogue, because racism in the art industry is a local and national issue. Particularly right now, only 1.2% of the museum collections around the country are by artists, African-American artists. And that percentage does not reflect the population. So until the museum collections are commensurate with the population, I think we still have to have these discussions and work collectively to move forward. And the type of work that this type of discussion inspires is an example of the work that I'm going to share with you today. The piece is entitled Interconnected Journeys, and it is an introspection on my own art practice and how, as it has progressed, it has never been a linear movement, meaning it never is a straight line. And in this piece, the mediums are acrylic and canvas. However, I'm using canvas as line to create the textures. And I start off by really thinking about the subject matter and how all of our lives interconnect and the importance of relationships and collaboration. So the whirlpool in the center reflects my journey, and the other intersecting lines, the organic lines, are all of the other paths and people who I've connected with. So interconnecting journeys is a macro view of my art practice and how it has moved and I've grown and learned, and those experiences I've shared in the previous panel discussion would be represented by the movement in and around. So I love the fact that as an artist, you're able to get so much out, that same energy that I put out or put into the canvas, the end user gets to enjoy that energy in their home. And very excited that that piece has found a happy home, and you can find more of my work on our website, www.gallerygiles. And please pay specific focus on the virtual exhibition catalog section. And that section allows you to drop into Gallery Giles and walk around and enjoy the work in virtual exhibition catalog number 11, which is our current exhibit behind me. And it also is a solo exhibition, and you can learn more about many different series that I have to offer, including the painting that I'm describing to you now, Interconnecting Journeys. And I'm very happy to have had this opportunity to touch you with my creativity, and look forward to seeing you at Gallery Giles. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then next, I have the pleasure of introducing the other co-owner of Gallery Giles, Frances Gichard, who is an artist and collector. And a beautiful perspective Frances shared during the March 13th conversation was, we're able to create from our creativity. That is what is in us, or what is in our hearts, or what is in our minds, or what we're seeing out today, the stories that we want to tell. So we still have that ability to tell those stories and get those stories out to change and move the needle forward. And we're also going to see a video submission from her as well.
Hi, my name is Frances Gichard, and I am co-owner, collector, and artist, also known as the artist Marlene Campbell. I found the conversation very interesting and very important, enough that I think these conversations need to be shared over and over again, as well as new conversations that we talk about all the time, because this subject matter is so important. It's so important not only to us as people of color, but it's also important to the world overall. I think that it would be a better world if we could figure out how to deal with racism in the arts and overall in our lives. What I found very interesting was a conversation with a lot of the younger people who were talking about discrimination in the workplace and how this is something that still has not changed over the eons. And so it's important that I think we figure out how to build platforms for young people entering the workforce to get the experience and the know-how and the talent so that they can compete in the overall market. So, you know, these conversations are very important. It did evoke emotion within me. It really makes me think about how I can better help young people when it comes to the arts and making sure that they have experience here at Gallery Guichard. I want to talk a little bit about my piece. It is the Great Migration series, and it is called Brighter Days, because there are brighter days. We will make brighter days. And the piece in itself is a landscape, and it is made with acrylic and sand. It's called the mixed media. And I have been inspired by our travels to South Africa. We traveled through the mountainous area called the Transkei, and it opened up, and it was just amazing to see the landscape. The sun was setting, the people were moving about, and the colors were just amazing. So I feel empowered, and I feel that I have to bring back those stories to be able to show others what I experienced. And it's about, you know, making sure we understand our ancestors. And so my piece is, you know, about our ancestors, and you can see them moving in the piece. And it's about being more socially, economically, and environmentally responsible. So we'll have something to leave to the next generation. Our ancestors did it, and we need to make sure that we do it for our future generations. So thank you so much. I truly was very pleased to be a part of the panel discussion. And I hope that you can visit my artwork more at galleryguichard.com. Visit our virtual exhibition catalogs. You'll see many of them, and you'll find my work right now in VEC number 12. Thank you.
All right, I just wanted to hop in and share a quote from another panelist from our March 6th discussion, Alexi Young, who is also not here, but I wanted to share her really powerful quote that resonated with me. So Alexi Young is the founder of Art West, whose mission is to rebrand the West Side experience through arts and culture, build connections within their creative community, and support local talent. In response to the question, what do you see as the best strategy to change the pattern of white culture trying to define art? She says, I feel like institutions, they send college students to come and hear and poke around and see how to get some answers on what is it that Black people are doing. How are we thriving? How are we still making things work when we have little to nothing? Or where are the food deserts? There's all these disparities. How are they making it work? Well, what's their concept? How are they gaining solutions? And do you do all of that work? You have all these conversations and you're still left with nothing. You're still left with the same disparities as before. And whether it is using years and years of this cyclical things, I feel like I rarely ever see any real solutions. Usually it's Eurocentric funding that comes to our neighborhoods, and it is just a drop in the bucket, which I thought was very powerful and thought-provoking. So thank you, Alexi. And thank you to all the March 13th panelists for your words and your artwork as well. I'm going to pass it over to my fellow intern, Kat, who is going to introduce one of our special participants today.
All right, that was really amazing work. I'm just blown away by all of our participants. Now for our final healing session, it is an honor to present Ariel James, a facilitator from the Inner Sense Healing Arts Collective in Chicago, which is a nonprofit organization focused on fostering self-reflection practices within disempowered populations in an effort to build a restored and engaged community. During the April 13th conversation, when Ariel was asked the question, "What do you want to see change in the next 5 years?" they responded, "As creatives, as people who are already dreaming and imagining, if we can settle in that space and really start to imagine what is possible, what can be next, instead of having it be in response to what's here now, it makes me really start to begin to feel like we create change." And so finally, welcome Ariel. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be a part of these conversations. And I think this was mentioned a little bit by one of the participants, but it can be at times really re-triggering, re-traumatizing to have these conversations. And I also think it is really important for us to be having them. So I always think that it's important to have the conversations, and it's equally important to be caring for ourselves throughout them and afterwards, to be tapping into the things that bring us joy, that bring us feelings of peace and ease within the discomfort sometimes. And so I'd like to offer you a meditation, one that I found to be really powerful, one that helps bring me back to a sense of equilibrium and connection with my inner self. So with that, if your screen is on and you'd feel more comfortable turning it off, please go ahead and do so. Wherever you are, just connecting with the support beneath you, bringing your feet flat on the floor, finding a long, straight spine, bringing your shoulders down away from your ears. Beginning to find any places in the body that may be holding on to tension or stress. And just sending those places a little bit of intention, letting them know that they can relax. Maybe in the jaw, maybe in the shoulders. And just bringing your awareness here to the breath. This ever-present life force within us. Noticing the rise and the fall of your chest and your belly with each inhale and each exhale. Feeling fully supported by the chair beneath you, by the earth beneath you. And then if it's comfortable for you, I invite you to begin to deepen your inhales and your exhales by any amount. Beginning to activate the parasympathetic nervous system within your body, also known as the rest and digest, really allowing your body to come back to a sense of equilibrium. Imagine a white ball of light about 18 inches above the crown of your head. And this white ball of light is no ordinary light. It is a healing and nourishing, ever-present light that is always available to you to access at any point. And as you envision this white ball of light hovering about 18 inches above the crown of your head, you notice that it begins to shower this light around you, in front of you, behind you, and to each side. Enveloping you in this warmth, this sense of calm and peace. And as this white light is showering all around you, it begins to puddle at your feet, encircling and enveloping you in a kind of orb or circle, surrounding you in a sense of safety and peace and calm. And then as this white light begins to puddle at your feet, it rises to your calves, to your knees, up to your thighs, your hips, your belly, your chest, your shoulders, your neck, all the way up through the crown of your head, till you're now completely enveloped, completely absorbed by this ever-present, ever-loving, constant source of connection. And through the healing magnetic properties of this light, it begins to draw from you anything that doesn't support you, any physical pain, stress, or just stress that may be present, any emotional turbulence, any worry, any thoughts that may be upsetting or distracting. You begin to feel all of these layers peeling away. The light can draw all of that from you. Anything within that is interfering with your experience of ever-present peace and calm and safety. This light is infinitely intelligent. You don't need to tell it what to do. It already knows. And I invite you to sit here for another moment or so, just allowing the light to pull from your being, your physical, energetic, mental, spiritual bodies, anything that is no longer serving you in this moment. Maybe you begin to notice some subtle shifts in the physical body, releasing of tension, relaxing of muscles, deepening of the breath, quieting of the mind. But also knowing that there's no right or wrong here, that whatever is happening is exactly as it is meant to be. And simultaneously, while this light is drawing from you, it is at the same time a radiant, abundant, giving light that is radiating itself into and through all the layers of your being. And as this light radiates into you from every angle, surrounding and permeating through all the cells in your body, passing through your skin and into your innermost spaces. The light becomes exactly what you need. So if you need courage, it becomes that. If you need a sense of safety, it fills you with that. And perhaps it is comfort or love, whatever it is that you're needing. It permeates the cells of your being to become exactly that. Opening yourself up to observe this ever-present light. Allowing it to permeate your physical, energetic, emotional, and spiritual body. And just opening yourself up to receiving whatever it is that you need in this moment. Allowing yourself to reside in the space of infinite possibility, of limitless potential. Knowing that you in this body are exactly as you were meant to be. that you are loved, you are deserving, you are enough exactly as you are. And we'll spend just another moment here, allowing ourselves to receive whatever healing energy we need from this light source. And as you're ready, I invite you to come back to deepening your inhales and your exhales. Maybe bringing one hand to your heart and one hand to the belly, making physical contact with your body. Again, connecting to the rise and the fall of your chest and your belly. Knowing that your breath in this practice is always available to you in any moment where you need a little bit of extra support, comfort, nourishment, holding. And as you're ready, you can gently open the eyes, maybe rubbing your chest or your thighs just to bring yourself back into your body and back into the room. And thank you for joining me in that meditation, and I'll hand it back over to Public Narrative.
Thank you again so much, Ariel, for providing that much needed space, imagery, and healing. I know I personally really needed it. Now I'm going to hand it back to our inspirational leader, Jamira. Just a side note, none of this would have happened or been possible without her encouragement and vision. But I'm sure you guys already know that. So here is Jamira to wrap up this event and do an activity with everyone and get some feedback.
All right. So this has been incredible. I am very fortunate, one, to work with each of you and of course to lead this organization. I will say though, I was really impressed with each of the times that we gathered the artists and the journalists for the conversations. It was a really remarkable experience to navigate this together. The invitation to do so, of course, offered to us by the MacArthur Foundation. So many, many thanks to the team over there for making this happen. But it's your voices, just your thoughts, your ideas, and your willingness to share your experiences that allowed us to gain and learn new perspectives. And ultimately, you know, we keep tossing this question around at Public Narrative, like, what is the public narrative? And this is indeed a part of that. So learning from you all, sharing experience, sharing space, but ultimately being an example of how we can have hard conversations and address very hard histories and very difficult histories, identifying what needs to be unlearned, identifying what we need to reimagine, but ultimately identifying where we need to take action. And I'm so incredibly inspired by the things that were shared through the pieces that were shared today. Very bold statements, as we knew we would get, but very bold statements, very bold pieces, and pieces that reflected on the past, as well as, you know, helped us to really look towards the future and what each of us can do in our respective roles and with the influence that we hold. So again, I'm very thankful to Adler University, the University of Chicago, for providing us interns of gold. I mean, that's just going to be my theme for this season of interns that we've had. They came into this space very much so new to the space in many instances, and with a lot of questions and curiosity. But the thing I'm most excited about for them was they had the willingness to explore, the willingness to ask questions, and really to just pursue, you know, the unknown. We didn't know what this would turn out to be, but with the guidance and leadership of our support system and nonprofit consultant, Anna Lloyd, they were very much so guided in a direction to leave it to the people to determine what this event is. So I'm incredibly just, you know, overwhelmed with joy for what this became. And I invite you all to share your own experience of what you thought of this event. So if you would go to menti.com and use the code 3953253 and leave us one word to describe today's art and culture experience. This is incredible. So many of the words you all have shared: mind-bending, powerful, transformational, thought-provoking, encouraging, inspired, healing, incredible, uplifting, community, provoking, empowering, liberating, levitating. I think I said healing, change, uplifting. This is awesome. This is really awesome. Oh, we're getting more in. Let me go back. So we got liberating, world building. I love it. I love it. This is incredible. I am so honored again to not only lead this organization, but to work with so many incredible people with great thoughts and ideas. Many of you in the chat, I mean, thank you for your participation and your support through the years of Public Narrative. I truly mean it from the bottom of my heart. And I think I tell this story quite often, but I mean it with everything in me. When I arrived at this organization, I knew what it could be, but I knew it could only be that if we could reach out and touch the folks who could contribute to it. And so if there's any way that you are interested in volunteering with Public Narrative, contributing or donating to Public Narrative, feel free to visit our website, www.publicnarrative.org. There are several tabs across the website, but I want to walk through a few invitations for you. On Thursday, May 13th, we're hosting our 26th annual Community Media Awards, where we'll be celebrating the work of Chicago journalists and community members who have done incredible things to uplift community voices during this time of social distancing. So if you would go to the website, you can click on the tab that says awards and nominate folks for the Studs Terkel Award, the Uplifting Voices Award, and of course, the Ripple Effect Award. The Ripple Effect Award, of course, is not just for journalists here in Chicago, but it's open to a journalist whose work, who is from anywhere across the US, but whose work has inspired communities in Chicago and beyond. So I'm really excited about those categories, and I will hope that you all will celebrate the journalists and their wins with us on Thursday, May 13th. All right. In addition to that, you know, we have several other events coming up. So if you want to stay connected with us to know what's going on the homepage, if you scroll down, you can enter your email address to be added to our e-newsletter, and you'll get tons of updates about what's going on with Public Narrative. At this time, I do want to open it up if there's any questions or any final thoughts that anyone wants to share. All right, so I see just one question, and that comes from, of course, Ms. Francine Reed over at Adler University, who was responsible for providing these incredible interns. So of course, we'll talk more about working together, but if you have any thoughts or ideas or anything that you'd like to discuss further as we continue to build out this art and culture project, our public health, public safety, or public education projects, feel free to email us at info@publicnarrative.org, and we'll be sure to be in touch with you. Again, thank you so much to our illustrious hosts and the coordinators of this beautiful event, the journalists, the artists who have come together and shared your skills and talents. We truly, truly appreciate you, and we will see you next time.